in clubs, just pubs.
But, and there's no, this is totally accepted now. This is totally accepted, right? You've all accepted that you live in a society where this is okay. I mean, in America, we don't have, I mean, when they brought the dogs into schools, I mean, there actually was a scandal at some point. They do it sometimes, or maybe dogs go to lockers, but you can't have dogs going in people's pot. I mean, you know, you're just not supposed to.
If you fight it with the judge, like, I was told by my barristers, like, just play straight back, go, cap in your hands.
Yeah.
Just, you know, I'm very sorry, I didn't mean to do this, never happen again.
Yeah.
If I sort of expressed my feelings of like liberty and, you know, this should
Right.
be my right to do this sort of thing.
You're punished.
Yeah.
Right. But the question is there, it's like drug testing, right? 30 years ago, we didn't really have much drug testing except like airline pilots or in the military, right? Now they're trying to introduce drug testing for school teachers, drug testing for students. I don't know if you do that here at all or not, you know? But, you know, so we actually started a real effort in the US to oppose random suspicionless drug testing of students. And part of the arguments were it didn't work. Part of it was that it had unintended consequences that were negative. And part of it was about, you know, freedom. Part of it was about, I don't want the school doing this to my kid. I mean, there was some sense, and so there's a sense, I mean, this is what Alex White keeps explaining to me, and I don't want to be crass about his presentation of the views here, but that you have this highly developed public health consciousness. But, you know, I sometimes define harm reduction as that which lies at the intersection of public health and human rights, right? And that part of what maybe has happened in Australia is that the harm reduction, the human rights piece of harm reduction has faltered somewhat. I mean, the notion that dogs can be, and meanwhile, of course, what else did I say? If it's booze, I mean, so you got people drinking like crazy and all sorts of stuff, and yet the police are sending a message that our priority is marijuana, because why? Right? You know? So, yeah.
I was just going to say that, or speaking for NUAA and for a lot of organisations, and harm reduction, and I work for NUAA, harm reduction has been funded by the government primarily based around bloodborne virus prevention only, and to the extent where other harms like abscesses and just physical harms like that even are technically funded, and that we have to maintain a focus completely on bloodborne viruses with that money, and that's, I think, had a really insidious effect over the last 20 years, and it's because the success that we've had, supposedly, well, the success we've had with HIV, I think, has, to an extent, coloured that, that we focused primarily on bloodborne viruses all the way, and hepatitis C is the big thing at the moment, and it's difficult for us, for instance, for NUAA to advocate beyond that stuff unless we use other money. And so even with that in itself, that becomes self-censoring, of course, but the focus really for so much of our funding is, and I'm talking widely through Health in New South Wales anyway, is based around bloodborne viruses, and so those wider social harms don't really get much of a talking to by organisations like ourselves.
Yeah.
Which is
well, you know, I mean, one positive thing is there is a new stream of funding amounting to millions of dollars, because George Soros has opened up not just a harm reduction stream of funding internationally, but a global drug policy reform stream. And Australia would be a bit disadvantaged because but not totally. I mean, the fact of the matter is if you had a good, strong proposal about advocacy stuff, there might be a possibility for funding in that area. You know, I mean, it's something to consider, you know, or to pick out what would the campaign be or something along those lines, you know.
You know, Sione reminds me of something that, you know, you asked the question, why is it that Australia was, you know, was such a leader 10 years ago and not so much now? And it might be an aspect of Australianness is that I think you could argue perhaps we peaked a little bit too early. You know, we solved this problem of HIV amongst injecting drug users. Very pragmatically, we funded the NSP program, and then so typical for Australia, we just rode on our laurels from that point on. We became complacent, and there was really nothing, you know, there was no impetus to then do the next thing. We've done it all now, and then we can just be tough on crime and the usual political bargaining. I think that might be one of the, you know, point to an answer.
We've done anything is when we've had to. The NSP, the harm reduction policies that we've got on the back of HIV, MSIG on the back of heroin, you know, 1,000 ODs a year, force the government. There was kind of nowhere else to run.
And also an illegal act in the NSP program. It was Alex Wodak handing out
Both those
you know,
occasions.
and with the
Tolerance room.
with the tolerance room, with the alleged injections. In both cases, it was very, very clever illegal acts that basically forced the government's hand. They were embarrassed into doing something.
Mhm. So do you see any opportunities for something new like that?
Better wait for the next disaster.
Yeah, that's what.
Wait for the next disaster. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting that the US has done this without the same sort of.
Well, it's the Prop 19 thing. I mean, I don't know, you know, it's very interesting. Every year, the Gallup polling organization asks, do you favor legalizing marijuana use? And, you know, it went from 12% in the 60s up to about 28% in the late 70s. And that was 11 states decriminalized marijuana. And then the Reagan era came and it dropped. It dropped quite substantially down to about 22%, hovered there for a while, and then it started to creep up so that by 2005, it was up to 36%. In the last 5 years, it's jumped to 46%. I mean, remarkable jump in public hearing. It's now 58% among people living out west. It's like 53 or 54% among Democrats. It's 60-something high percent among young people age 18 to 25. It's 70% among liberals, right? There's a gender gap with men being more in favor by about 10 points, like 55% of men, 45% of women. You know, the blacks are a little bit less than whites, but you know, they're getting there. They're sort of split 50-50. Latinos, older Latinos are the worst. They are the most socially conservative. Even though they often vote Democrat, they are very socially conservative. Young Latinos, though, are getting closer to young whites and blacks around this stuff. But somebody asked, why does this happen? They're US, right? And part of it was the medical marijuana thing. I mean, that really did help transform the imagery of the marijuana user. It led to different discussions. Part of it was we've now had 3 presidents in the White House, you know, who have smoked marijuana, right? The first one said he didn't inhale. The second one wouldn't admit it till he got outed by an old friend. And the most recent one, when asked to be inhaled, said yes, of course, and many times. It wasn't at the point, right? So there's a change, right? Part of it is, I think, that the state budget deficits, and so the potential of getting tax revenue. Part of it was the violence in Mexico. The former drug czar was claiming falsely, but good for us, that over half the Mexican drug gang money was coming from marijuana, which is a little ridiculous, but it's helped serve our purposes that he was saying that. It was, you know, but still, it is billions of dollars a year. And I think there's also generational change. You know, I mean, it's been true for the last 30 or 35 years that roughly half of all 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds have tried marijuana. But this is the first generation of teenagers for whom you could say over half of their parents smoke marijuana, right? So there's a different conversation and dialogue going on now, right? It's just, and then the entertainment media has really played a positive role. I mean, just a remarkable role, actually. The movie industry and others, because it's not like Cheech and Chong. They're not glamorizing marijuana use. They're not, you know, I mean, sometimes they're spoofing it, you know, with, what's it, Harold Kumar, whatever that thing is called, right? But a lot of it's more just, like Susan Sarandon never does a movie where she doesn't smoke marijuana, right? The movie, it's complicated. And you see the movie, it's complicated with Meryl Streep and Alec Baldwin and Steve Martin. And there's this wonderful scene where Steve Martin and Meryl Streep go out on a date, and they're in their like late 50s, and they land up smoking a joint and having a wonderful evening, and you know, it's very nice. The movie landed up getting a more restricted rating age-wise, right? Not because they showed marijuana being smoked, but because they showed people smoking marijuana with no negative consequences, right? But nonetheless, the impact of something like that is so substantial. So something, even without having a real crisis, something's taken off, and then the media started to become much more our ally rather than our enemy, right? So, well, no, it was also, you know, even like Michael Phelps, right? The Olympic athlete, right? I mean, he wins more gold medals than he made in history. And then, you know, 6 months later, some asshole films him smoking a joint, right?
3-foot bomb.
A bomb, 3-foot bomb. 3-foot bomb, excuse me. You know, but I mean, you know, the first reaction to the whole thing was, oh, isn't that terrible? Michael Phelps and our Olympic hero, and we got to take him off the box of the cereal, and I mean, you know, and how we punish him, and you know, and then about 24, 48 hours into the news cycle, people started going, what are we talking about? He's 23 years old. He's doing what half of all other 23-year-olds are. I mean, meanwhile, the guy who spent half his life underwater, give the guy a break already, you know? I mean, and it was just a change, right? And then one of the, Kellogg's cereal, which got rid of, you know, they didn't renew their contract with him, but Subway, the big sandwich shop in America, you know, which was about to do it, instead they then, you know, it started a campaign called, you know, come to Subways and get a buzz or something like that. So, you know, I mean, they saw the opportunity there. Yeah.
Hi, sir, I've got another question just on dealing with the media.
Yeah.
I saw you on TV the other night talking with Steve Price, which is one of our kind of more shock jock type dudes.
That-
The 7 p.m. program.
That was the 7 p.m. one?
Yeah, probably not anywhere near as bad as the guys you get in America. But you were talking before about goading, and I noticed you kind of goaded him. Like the angrier he got, you were smiling more and more and more.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good technique to use? And also, what I noticed is you were talking very logically, and he just brings, these guys just tend to bring it back to emotion, you know.
Yeah.
He was saying things like, oh, I don't believe, you know, you can think this kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
What about the children? That
Yeah,
kind of-
well, I don't know. I mean, the truth is, you know, first of all, I haven't seen the thing yet. I'm sitting in a little studio looking at a camera like that, and all of a sudden some guy's calling me an idiot, you know, on the screen.
Yeah.
You know, and whenever somebody does that, like, all I think of, like, that's my mother. And I just go for the jugular. So that kind of conflict I'm just very familiar with. And so, you know, it's like, you know, like when they said, you know, it was heated, I go, that was heated? I mean, it was like, I love ripping somebody's jugular out. But
You respond to that kind of emotion.
well,
I think
what I
they-
find is, it's, you know, sometimes when you're just like looking into that black hole of the camera, you have to sort of judge it. A lot of the times, like on the ABC thing, you know, they're asking questions, but it's all about being reasonable, right? And then sometimes, I did a radio interview yesterday with a guy named Howard Sattler. He's a right-wing guy in Perth, right? And, you know, I have no idea what he said about me once I got off the show, but what I know about him, like doing Bill O'Reilly on Fox in the U.S., a lot of people who listen to O'Reilly disagree with him on this issue. And so I play various roles. Sometimes, like on an ABC, it's talking to reasonable people and getting them to move over in the discussion. Sometimes, like on a shock jock thing like that, and a right-wing thing, what you know is that some of their listenership never gets to hear anybody express this opinion. So what I do there is kind of just mix it up, right? And it's kind of like, you know, I just try to run over them. I mean, basically, you know, what do you want? And I'll use the right-wing arguments. I don't understand why the taxpayer, are taxpayers in Perth keen on spending millions of dollars to lock people for pot? Don't the taxpayers of Perth want the cops focusing on real crime? Why exactly, Howard, do you want to be subsidizing the organized criminals? I don't get it, you know? And then they'll say to me, so do you smoke pot? And I say, yeah. I said, not now, you know? I said, but yeah, you know, I do. And he goes, well, how? I say, I've been an occasional marijuana user. Like, I've been an occasional drinker for much of my, you know, since I was young. He goes, oh, well, you're going to get high in Australia? He says to me. I said, I sure hope so. You know? I mean, it's like, you know, I'd like to get to kick back one evening, you know? But I mean, the fact of the matter is, what I know is that some of his audience are like in shock. But fuck them, because, I mean, they're not going to be open anyway. But for the part of his audience that just smoked a joint before they listened to him anyway, like they're listening going, yes, finally somebody's saying they're going to smoke a joint in Australia, you know, and like, you know, and they're telling like it is. And the fact of the matter is, a guy like him, like Sattler, he ain't a dummy. And so it's like a lot of those guys, they don't have the conviction about this issue. It's like, you know, Bill O'Reilly is in the United States, this right-wing radio show. I did a show a couple months ago. And he was going on about, you know, you can't legalize marijuana because of child abuse. And I said, what? You know, I mean, you could see he was just out of arguments, right? And as then we ended the show, and then as I'm walking off, I say, Bill, you know, he actually wrote a book about kids. And in there, he actually has a number of paragraphs that sound like smart harm reduction stuff. And I say, Bill, you know, I was about to quote your book about how to deal with kids. And as I'm walking out, he goes, you know, I'll tell you the truth, I don't think we're that far apart on this issue. And he's losing
So
his...
it's about ratings for them, is it?
It's about what?
Ratings?
It's about ratings, it's about them reading their own audience, it's about, you know, the other thing that happens, especially in the United States, is that like if, you know, the two TV programs that have me on most often are Fox and Al Jazeera. You know? I mean, I do all the other ones too. But the interesting thing about Fox is, you talk about, Murdoch, and Murdoch owns, Fox and owns all this stuff, and some of their stuff is absolutely nightmarish, right? But I got to tell you, right now, the Wall Street Journal, right? Murdoch owned right now, their columnist who writes on Latin America is a legalizer, right?